Sophie Mokoena, thanks very much indeed. Live to us there from Tshwane as we lead into the Freedom Park Heritage Site and Museum, which has really been the center of our focus for much of the morning. As we take in this historic moment in many respects, the homecoming ceremony of South African freedom fighters who lost their lives in Zambia and in Zimbabwe. Good morning to you. I'm Ayanda Nyati. Great to be in your company as we continue our continuous rolling coverage of this particular ceremony, the first of its kind, which is going to entail an address from the president sometime this morning, who without a doubt will reflect on the many people who paid the ultimate price for the country's hard-won freedom. If you've just joined us, of course, part of what we've seen is a number of steps as part of this homecoming ceremony, including multi-faith rituals, which took place as early as around 5:30 a.m., 6 a.m. this morning, where the relatives and some spiritual guides who are helping facilitate this process appease the ancestors, if you like, as they welcome the spirits of those who've been buried outside the country's borders for years, quite frankly, and are finally brought home today. It's a journey that started several years ago and has culminated in many respects in this homecoming ceremony, with the respective families given an opportunity later on to carry out their own burials after waiting, in some instances, for decades to finally receive the remains of their loved ones. What you're watching now is this cortege, if you like, of these remains, which arrived in the country on Wednesday. That's when the repatriation process took place, all in the build-up to this homecoming ceremony, which I mentioned is going to be attended by a number of government officials, including the president. Of course, what this moment also allows us to do is really take in the rich history that comes with Freedom Park Heritage Site and Museum. It's actually divided into 5 main sites, if you like. That includes Isivivane. We've spoken about that for much of the morning. This is a spiritual place, if you like, a resting place for those who've died while fighting for the country's liberation. And the concept of Isivivane is actually derived from the word viva, which means to come together in a group in some instances. Another aspect is called Iskumbuto. That's Isiswati for memorial. And this is a main memorial site that tells the most important stories around the conflict in South Africa's history. In fact, according to the Arts and Culture Ministry, it also comprises of different elements itself as people take in the journey that has been the country's liberation story. There's also a wall of fames at this particular heritage site and museum. And this is essentially a site where the names of our struggle stalwarts are inscribed of the walls. In fact, these are the heroes and heroines who, as we've been mentioning for much of the morning, paid the ultimate price for the country's hard-won freedom. Many of them also brought into the country through this repatriation process, which, as I mentioned, has been years in the making and has culminated in what we're seeing unfold for much of the morning today. There's also a sanctuary, by the way, at that particular site. And the concept around this, I think, is quite interesting. This is essentially a quiet place where anyone, we are told, is able to come and reflect, perhaps engage in some kind of prayer to a monolithic God or to the ancestors as they take in what is being described the world over as South Africa's miracle, right? This fact that we're able to transition without a lot of bloodshed, at least here at home, even though, of course, we now know very well that there's been a hefty price paid, especially by the families today that are going to be at the center of this homecoming ceremony. And then a fifth aspect of this heritage site is called the Eternal Flame. And that's where the heroes and heroines who've died without their names being recorded are actually remembered. This flame, we're told, burns continuously to remind the countries of the names that we'll never actually get to know. Part of what is so significant about today, of course, is that we finally get to shine a spotlight on names perhaps that may have fallen by the wayside as we take in the different ebbs and flows of our complex democracy. Today, these individuals, in many respects, get an opportunity to be remembered and to be centered in this narrative. But of course, what is not lost to us or lost on us is that there are many other people who will never know, who also really paid the ultimate price and who have left their own families desperate for some kind of closure as they look to this day for their remains. In fact, as I say that, I'm reminded of the family of the current Justice Minister, for example, Thembi Simbelane, whose sister also went missing. My understanding is that to this day, in fact, they haven't been able to, A, find out what happened, or B, get a sense of where her remains might have been. And so, in many respects, this eternal flame portion of this museum and heritage site is to pay homage to those individuals who, to this day, their story feels like it still needs to be told. But we've also spent a considerable amount of time speaking about some of the frontline states that have assisted South Africa to get to this point. I mean, today, for example, much of the focus has been around Zimbabwe and Zambia. That's where these 42 heroes and heroines come from. We understand, of course, that 49 remains were exhumed, but due to other complications, including the fact that the remains of some of those who are being exhumed couldn't be linked to any next of kin, only 42 of those 49 individuals, if you like, are being brought into the country today. And in fact, part of what I was alluding to was the frontline states. They go further than just Zambia and Zimbabwe, of course. Angola forms part of that loose alliance, Mozambique, Botswana, as well as Tanzania. And all of these countries at some instance or at some stage were crucial in assisting South Africa to essentially push back against the repressive apartheid regime and usher in what you and I are able to enjoy today as the democratic dispensation, which of course is still very much a work in progress. But nonetheless, no matter where you stand on that debate, everybody has to admit that a lot has been done to get us to certainly where we are now. Once again, if you've just joined us, it's gone 9:15 on this Friday, the 27th of September, and we're building up to the official homecoming ceremony of our heroes and heroines. That's how it's being described for much of the morning. Finally brought back home after years of not necessarily being in this country. These are the country's struggle stalwarts who died outside of South Africa, specifically in Zambia and Zimbabwe. Today they're being brought back home, and we expect this moment, if you like, to be a culmination of that process. It's the first of its kind. I mean, South Africa has always, if you like, brought back our struggle stalwarts in dribs and drabs, for lack of a better term. In fact, some of those have been documented. But this is the first time that the country has decided to do this in one large group. And in many respects, this is in line with the hopes and aspirations of relatives who have been calling for this for quite some time. And so in many respects, this is the government's response to that. And from what we've been able to hear from much of the day, it's the first of many to come.